Okay, here's what we got. Community discussion. Responses gone bad. One more reminder. Um, Everything that we've going to be chatting about will get reposted in terms of incidents that we're talking about. Mike Sovereign is has blessed us with his presence and will talk us through his PowerPoint 5 instances that he thinks are worthy of discussion for the purposes of um, starting a discussion. And like I said, all this will be in the news area, and that takes it over to Mike. I will stop the
Oh,
share, and you can get underway.
good. Can you see my screen?
You're good.
All right. When I did, I'm not covering this one, but it could be a sixth. I mean, obviously, there's many options, but that one in North Carolina, that was a house fire. They were sent to the emergency department was or fire department was sent to a location 30 minutes away from its intended spot, and so the place was a total loss. And even the fire chief, he has a quote here, which I thought was interesting. We've got some of the best dispatchers in the state of North Carolina that work up there. They're in an $18 million building. They've got state-of-the-art technology. 25 years ago, we were running around looking at map books and rural paved roads, trying to find out where we were at. But today, with all of the technology and the protocols in place, mistakes like this should not happen. So, yeah. So anyway, Steve, I know you've touched on a few of these in the past, but I thought I would just kind of run through the facts on some of these in greater detail, and then we can have a discussion addressing where, how USNG perhaps could have avoided or helped in some of these situations. So this first one, which happened February 27th, 2024, it was 26-year-old Amanda Nenegar, where her car became stuck right at the Arizona-California border. She called 911. She kind of fell asleep and, got off the road. She was 3 miles away from any major road at that point, and her Toyota Camry was stuck on a boulder, so it was inoperable. She attempted to provide location information, but she couldn't recall the road she was traveling on. The dispatcher couldn't pinpoint her position. They were talking for nearly an hour. The dispatcher had mentioned that her phone was hitting off a tower in Palo Verde, California, but that's kind of where it ended. And then her blue Toyota Camry was found, but she wasn't found at that time. She wasn't found for another 2 weeks. She likely had died of exposure, and she was found sitting under a tree. But she was on the phone for over an hour. She had to provided or tried to provide coordinates of some sort. Um, but that's one unfortunate situation. And Steve, feel free to add any commentary if you'd like. Otherwise, the second one you've already kind of touched on briefly, and the horrible situation for DC and their Office of Unified Communications. You alluded to the fact that a fire department has kind of implemented their own kind of shadow operation. But 3 examples that they referred to in this article: fire engines were dispatched to 1704 R Street Northwest instead of 1704 R Street Southeast. So it's the same street, same number, but a completely different quadrant of the city. And so as they were heading to the one location, this 4-story apartment complex was engulfed in flames. Nobody died, but there was extensive damage in that situation. And another one in 2020 in DC, a 13-year-old girl had called 911 after her mother suffered a heart attack. Paramedics were sent to the wrong address on Oglethorpe Street Northwest instead of Northeast, and therefore they arrived 20 minutes late, and the woman later died at the hospital. And then the last example I pulled from this was 2 years ago. Dispatchers were sent to Savannah Street instead of Savannah Terrace, and first responders arrived 10 minutes late to the home of a 2-year-old baby who had stopped breathing, and the infant was later pronounced dead on arrival at Children's Hospital. And then they did have a city auditor who did a report going through all of these cases. And they said, we basically found a dysfunctional agency all across the board. In a single day, dispatchers sent responders to the wrong address 10 times. So that's pretty damning, I would say. This next one doesn't necessarily fit the theme perfectly, but I thought I'd still include it. Bryce Bork was actually kind of a friend of a friend. I didn't personally know him, but I do feel like if him or his friends were aware of USNG, they perhaps could have implemented if they would have done it in a timely manner. But the facts of the case are that Bryce was 23 years old. He went missing after a night out with friends. He was heavily intoxicated. They got dropped off at 2:08 a.m. At 3256 Hill Ridge Drive in Eagan. And although his apartment was only a 45-minute walk away, I mean, his friend should have definitely stuck with him, but he said he was fine, but he became disoriented and he headed in the completely wrong direction, heading northwest towards the Minnesota River Valley instead of towards his apartment. Then 26 minutes later at 2:34, he called his friends, telling them that he was lost. His phone at that point only had 2% battery. It was obviously pitch black out. He was in a marshy area, so he could not accurately describe where he was. And then his phone died. It wasn't until the next morning around 10:50, after his friends tried reaching out to him again, but it just went straight to voicemail, that they reported him missing. Search efforts did then ensue, including through the use of drones, helicopters, volunteers. They searched over 1,500 acres, but it was difficult terrain, including 14-foot high grass, cattails, marshy areas, and then obviously the Minnesota River itself. And so he is still missing to this day.
Michael,
Yeah.
I'll just throw out if you want more information on that case, I'm the search and rescue IC.
Oh my gosh. Okay. That'd be fascinating to know.
But we'll take that up at the end of this if there's more questions. There's a lot more detail about the challenges relating to this between cell phone information, cell phone tower data, the whole thing with the Apple phone and the Find Me app, etc. It's extremely complicated. I've been on this for 23 months.
Okay, very interesting.
But I'll back off, and if somebody wants to ask questions about this post, I'll be around.
Yep. Number 4 here. So this was Robert and Kim Dotson, and they were asleep in their home. They were on the second level in their bedroom. It was 11:30 p.m. at night. They heard some faint knocks on the door. By the time they heard the third one, Robert came down to the door and opened the door, and he did have a gun with him. And at that point, 3 officers fired and struck him fatally. His wife then came down with a pistol as well, and she fired at the cops, who then returned fire 19 times. The wife did not recall hearing any of the police clearly identify themselves, but again, they were up on the second level with the door closed at the time. But the more damning part of this situation was that the police officers were sent to the wrong home across the street, and there is unedited badge cam, and you kind of see a screenshot there saying this is not 503 or 5308. So they approached house number 5305 instead of 5308. And by the time they realized that, it was too late. At that moment in time, Robert had opened the door with the gun in his hand. And then it wasn't until later when her son, who happened to be a police officer in the area, checked the dispatch log, where Kim learned that the officers had stormed the wrong house. And then this last one, which Steve, I know you're aware of. So this was 16-year-old Fitz Thomas and his friends, they were swimming at River Creek, which is a shallow inlet off the Potomac River near the Virginia-Maryland border. And so Fitz and a friend decided to swim across the creek, which is about 180 feet. The friend made it across, Fitz didn't, so they assumed that he was somewhere in the water. A friend of his, Angela, called 911, but really struggled to clearly describe the location. So she said, it looks like 4 or 5 different things trying to describe it. She said, we're at River Creek, the club in the back. It's like in a small inlet off the Potomac, so it's not that deep. You drive all the way back, like at the very back, the park down at River Creek, like on the Potomac, on the Virginia side. And then her last statement was, Confluence Park is like exactly where we are, Confluence Park in River Creek. That's what the park is called. So despite her efforts to clarify, there was confusion. There was also jurisdictional confusion because of the Potomac River and that Maryland had jurisdiction for search and rescue for that. So it actually took 36 minutes for an ambulance to arrive to the correct location. By that time, they had already pulled him out and he was deceased. So those are just 5 of the many different examples that we could go through. And so at this point, my question to everybody, and Steve, I'll let you kind of take over the discussion, but how could USNG potentially have helped in these or similar situations?
I'm actually gonna open it to the floor. I think the meat of what should stimulate some thinking here on how we should be approaching or thinking about how we can get the message across. These 5 examples, right? So Bernard's got his hand up. I'll shut up and go for it, Bernard.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'd be curious in those examples, the cell phone themselves, because I've been told that the cell phone, you're able to get the location from the cell phone, or at least the cell phone, the nearest cell phone tower. How did that work or not work in those examples?
I can address that as it relates to the Borka case. There's a number of different things related to that, and I'll try and make it quick, although I'm known for taking longer than I should. In the Borka case, the cell phone that Bryce was using was an Apple i13. We know from a number of different research groups who have looked at the accuracy of GPS information to a cell phone, how relatively accurate the GPS information is on the phone. But the information that was originally given to law enforcement was from the cell phone tower providers. There's a problem there too. They were dealing with 4 towers, and normally we're dealing with 3. And one of those towers was very, very close to the target area. But what people didn't understand is that the cell phone and the antenna that was facing from that tower, the subject was below the primary input area of that antenna. So it messed up some of the data that was being processed. Now, admittedly, there was a different organization, that another law enforcement agency, that reached out and provided what they thought was the correct location for Bryce at that time and his direction of movement. And they used information from all 4 cell towers. Once we found out that Bryce had been using the Find Me app from Apple, they were able to get that information from his friend's app, and that contained the cell phone, it's been a very long day. It contained the GPS data that the phone was receiving at the time, and that was then sent in a format to his friend, and law enforcement took that, and we were able to go right out to where Bryce had been. Admittedly, the 2 were close to each other as it relates to a general search and rescue deployment methodology, but the cell phone information as it related to GPS was absolute correct as far as the information that we could see, the general pathway that he had gone, and it conflicted with direction of travel that came out of the cell tower data. But again, that cell tower data had additional data set into it that caused quite a bit of problem. And I know that dealing with his friends, we had interviewed his friends, we had interviewed other people, and I always, for all of the organizations I deal with, one of the first things we tell them to do when we start talking about coordinate references is we make them download the USNG app. Because one, if they're not used to it, it helps them see it any way that they want to, whenever they want to in their application. But I've had comments come back, and I can also see it too. Is there a dummies version of that so people can just start being able to digest a frame of reference point that they can give others for a coordinate? And I would like to be able to see a discussion on that subject. I'll stop at this point.
Bernard, are you good?
Well, how about on any of the other examples?
Well,
Like
I'd
the
like
woman
to
in,
just, I'd
like
like
the
to
woman
just
in,
chime in,
when-
if I could, just follow up with Ken. Ken, I'm so glad you're here. And I think there's a huge opportunity to dive deeper into your experiences with that particular case. And I'd like to nominate you for some kind of a presentation at a future meeting where we can go into detail on this and talk about some of that stuff and some of the details. Is there potential for something like that?
Yeah, and generally in the winter months is the easiest time for me to be able to pull some of that together, because the only cases I tend to deal with are either brand new ones, which don't happen much in the winter, or ones that are outside of the region that are older. I've got cases that are a couple years old, so I put my
Steve, do
time
we
into
have
that.
Steve, do we have some kind of a venue or forum that we can provide to Ken?
Yeah, absolutely. We could do that as a
I think
special,
it would be
special
it
presentation.
would be an amazing discussion to have, to hear his experiences, especially as a USNG proponent, and to hear his ideas and experiences on this. So I'd like to nominate him for a future professional growth seminar or topic for future discussion.
I think that's a great idea. I'll coordinate with Ken, and we'll find something that will work reasonably for him, because he's a busy guy.
Yep. So glad you're here, Ken.
Thank you, and Randy, I gotta say very much thank you for all of your help and support, and for the LiDAR data that you provided me for this case too.
Yeah, I do remember. That was interesting. Yes. Not as effective as we might have hoped, but timely anyway, an interesting application for that data.
Yeah, Bernard.
Yeah, I
the
do
floor is
have a
yours.
follow on. I agree with Randy. This is a great input. I do have a follow on question for you, Ken, which is, I just wanted to understand what you said about it would be good if there were like a simple way to get a quick location and then get into the details. I didn't quite follow that. Like if you could just give a couple of numbers and then you'd know about the details,
Well, if you use the USNG app,
yeah,
which is really what we like to present, you're dealing with what the coordinate system looks like. Now, Randy's in a good place where, because Dakota County has initiated utilizing that early on, there are signs like that in their county parks. I used to work for the Department of Natural Resources, and I've done multiple searches in DNR environments. And I've yet to see anything in the state of Minnesota park system that has a US National Grid sign. So the general public hasn't got a clue what USNG is, let alone if you're to say, oh, here, use this app. That app has wonderful capabilities for people like you and me and searchers and law enforcement, but it needs to be simplified for just, I'm thinking that is there a way to simplify it for the general user to be able to just click on an app that says, here is a coordinate system for reference for search, rescue, or emergency, pass this coordinate on to your 911 call.
Well,
And not have to have all the other things on the backside.
if Ken, I think that we've been able to create some interesting resources and things like that. But one of the issues we've been fighting with from the very beginning has been finding some kind of recognized authority in government, any level, that will give us a voice or provide an endorsement. We were happy to have that endorsement from FEMA, but it didn't necessarily trickle down. And we have seen local government embrace it to varying degrees, but it's really been tough trying to find the appropriate recognized authority that will give this a voice. And I think you could help us with that.
Jules has got his hand up. Go ahead, Jules.
Yeah, we're running out of time, so I'll try to be quick.
Yeah, well, Jules,
you,
we'll let it run. We'll let it
Well-
run. We ran long on some other stuff, so yeah. As long as people want to hang around, we'll keep going.
what you're saying about acquainting the general public is exactly right. It's tough to expect things to filter down as much as you'd like that to happen. In the Fitz-Thomas case, we did. I wrote a few letters to the Washington Post guy that wrote the story. No follow up there. Tom Terry and I went and briefed Loudoun County emergency responders. It was in the Loudoun County area where that happened, but the jurisdictional issue of how the 911 calls were handled is exactly right, because Maryland owns the whole Potomac River up to the Virginia coastline. And so again, the call got routed out to Maryland, and there was confusion there, compounded by the fact that at the same time, I think Maryland was being lobbied by Rapid SOS to provide off-the-shelf positioning capability for emergency response. And despite many attempts with the Rapid SOS people to get them to just adopt the U.S. National Grid as one of the positions they report, which would go quite a ways toward solving this problem if they would just make it a part of their complement of however they report incidents, because they market all over the place emergency response capability. But anyway, they've been non-responsive, maybe because they think somebody's trying to sell them something or cut into their business, neither of which is the case. But like I say, we talked to the Loudoun County Emergency Responder Fire Department people. They were receptive. They said, why don't you talk to the supervisor? And so we did. We engaged the local supervisor for that area, and a couple of them actually. And again, they expressed interest, but the nature of politics is interest today evaporates tomorrow for some reason, and unless there's some way to get funding on it or put in place some educational program, which is what we advocated they do, to acquaint the public with what the U.S. what the grid is and how it can help them. So, I don't mean to just continue to complain about all these things. It's just hard to get traction, again, at the local level, because it's so fragmented. Over.
Hey, Jules, I would recommend you go read the article I wrote on LinkedIn. That's my vision of what we need to do going forward. Without calling out FEMA directly, I've called out the fact that we need somebody at the federal level to become the champion of U.S. National Grid. And I think the way we get there is by increasing the pressure in the press, in social media, and other venues of that nature. I don't think I think we're past the point where writing letters is going to get anything done. So that would be my spin on it. Rich, go ahead. You're up next.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, Rich McCrae here. Steve, I've got an idea for outreach. I volunteer with the International Association of Wildland Fire. I'm an associate editor on the Wildfire magazine. It's all volunteer work that I do, but I'd like to recruit a writer for an article in the Wildfire magazine. This comes out quarterly. The magazine has articles on, it concentrates on wildland fire, everything from operations to research to fire ecology, kind of a broad spectrum of articles. But I'd like to recruit a writer. And the topic I'm thinking about is if we could get someone to write an article about, I know some of the Florida incident teams use USNG, I don't know which ones, about some assignment they went on, like with a hurricane or whatever, probably a hurricane, and how they used USNG during their assignment and why they used it. The article could be usually about 2,000 to 3,000 words. But I'd like to see if we could get someone to send me a proposal, just a couple paragraphs on how they might write that article, and then I'll run that by our main editor and see if we can get that published.
Rich, are you open to republishing other stuff that's already been written?
Yes, we are. I would have to run that by the editor, but yeah, I think repurposing would be a good deal. The magazine, there's no pay. It's all volunteer for the writers. So,
Sure.
It's all voluntary. So,
Right. Did help me out here. Did you publish, correct me if I'm wrong, someone published Al's discussion, or maybe it was your discussion about what happened with the Yarnell Hill fire?
yes, we did. Yeah, Al Stute wrote an article for the Wildfire magazine. This has been 5, 6 years back, maybe longer, and we got that published. I helped get that published in the Wildfire magazine, and Al wrote it. It was very well received. So
Yeah, so maybe we can do kind of a follow-up. Here we are 7 years later, and what have we learned?
Steve,
Right.
Do we have any references to that article anywhere on our website?
It's on the news page.
Okay.
Yep, just click. It's there. Click on it. That'd be okay. We'll powwow in the board of directors unless somebody's willing to stick up their hand like Bernard, who is a fabulously good writer. I'm thinking maybe we can get him and Al to tag team on something like that. Al does a first draft, Bernard does the cleanup draft, you get the rough draft, and your editor goes thumbs up or thumbs down.
Steve, I'd like to just throw out a plug for the board of directors. We have a number of people on this call that are excellent candidates, and we'd certainly like to have you engage.
I could not agree more. We'd love to see your interest, your passion, focused in on being a member of the board of directors. So please give some thought to it, some hard thought to it. And as I indicated, the commitment is literally next to nothing. So it doesn't mean that the the effort that you put in results in next to nothing. Again, if you reflect on where we were 2 years ago and where we are now, it's a difference of night and day. And 2 years from now, hopefully the complaints that we're hearing here about the need to get the word out better and to be better engagement, we should be seeing articles. The thought struck me, rather than discussing why these 911 centers and responders are having difficulty, we should be seeing articles that say, rather than what's the problem, here's the solution. So that's what we need to move towards. Bernard's giving thumbs up. We like that.
I like that.
Floor's still open. Come on, we got to have more meat. I'm going to take the screen back, Mike.
Sure.
Steve, this is BJ.
Yeah, go ahead, BJ.
I agree completely with what Ken Anderson says about trying to get USNG more familiar, raise the awareness of the public for USNG. But also when we're talking about responses, at least in Minnesota, the search and rescue response is under the auspices of the county sheriff offices. And so if we could reach, I know that several counties in Minnesota use USNG as their response standard, but most of them don't. And so there is a Minnesota Sheriff Association. I wonder if that's a conference that we could do a presentation at and try to compare or get some examples of the sheriff's offices and counties that do use USNG versus those that don't, and try to get the sheriff to spread the word amongst their peers about how it works and why they should use it.
Great comments, BJ. I've scribbled them down. I had actually been trying to target getting to the sheriff's conference with a booth this year, but other life events got in the way and I had to put a scratch on it. So it's definitely on the scan for next year. And but the idea of trying to get on their venue for giving a presentation, that's a great idea, and I'll see what we can come up with for Minnesota. We can use that as a test balloon, see if it works here, and if it does, we can, try to do better promotion nationally.
Hey, Steve, I just did a Google search and there's a winter conference in Alexandria, December 8th through 10th.
Edward, you joined us late. Thank you very much for being here. Edward's Ed's up in Park Rapids. I met him at the Minnesota GIS LAS conference, and they're giving consideration to trying to play ball on US National Grid. He works in the sheriff's office. So there you go, BJ. You got a convert right there.
Yeah. This is Edward. I'm not directly in the sheriff's office. I'm in the GIS department, but our supervisor has spoken with the sheriff about it. And like I say, he is aware of it and wants to start working towards it. It's just a matter of time and funding type things. So
Yeah.
I'm going to try and get with him and get started working on stuff over the winter here as time allows.
Thank you for being here today, Edward. Try it again, BJ. I stepped on you.
Oh, remember, Steve, when you came up to Lake County back in 2019 and offered to help us get USNG started in our county? When we did the presentation about other counties that were using USNG to mark their trails, Hubbard County was the first one that I remember that was already using USNG to mark their trails. They just weren't using it in the blue sun format. Just make it so I know there, and
yeah, we're only
to help them switch.
We're only catching about 40% of it. You're wobbling. I think, BJ, where you're going with that is Hubbard County had and I'd mentioned this to Ed, had a series of accidents that we used as kind of the part of the self when I came up north. And so Yeah, it's like we've come full circle.
Steve,
Okay, out to the
Steve,
floor. Go ahead.
Steve, did you hear my comment about the sheriff's conference in December?
I did.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yep.
I just want acknowledgement. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
I threw up some additional questions if we wanted to go longer. This has been an active discussion, and I'm thinking that we probably should call it quits for the day, unless there's somebody else that wants to continue to consider this issue. I put up some additional ideas that, are worthy of consideration on an issue like this. The takeaways that I've got from today right now is we would like to coordinate with Ken for him to do a specific presentation. It will work better for Ken to try to do something in winter. And I think most likely it would be best if we tried to target a specific event for Ken and we can promote it as a webinar kind of thing. Ken, does that make sense from your perspective? Are you still with us?
No, I'm still here. I'm just not, I don't know where I would work it in at the moment. It would be after the first of the year.
Got it.
I
Yep.
mean, as a request, I've got other things I'm still trying to follow up on currently.
Understood.
And we also have, what'll be interesting is, in December, there's also going to be a presentation by the U.S. Air Force here in Minnesota as it relates to the process that CAP uses for search and rescue. And the U.S. National Grid, I'm assuming, is going to be part of that as it relates between air operations and ground operations. So I'm focusing my attention to be able to participate in that particular one in mid-December.
Understood. I'll coordinate with you. We'll see if we can make something happen. Search and rescue idea came forward that it'd be great if there was some sort of a quick reference ability to show your location, help people understand why, like US National Grid serves the purposes of being able to do that, but the community is not educated well enough to understand the value, and correspondingly, call centers are not going to be able to effectively understand it. So I think we've done as much as we can from the grassroots. We got to start coming down from the top through publications. That's why outreach through articles like in Wildland, the Wildland Fire publication, the value there is tremendous. And I'll coordinate with Al and Bernard to see what we can do about putting together an article. And then last but not least, BJ's suggestion towards the public, raising the public awareness issue. That amounts to, can we get some articles written, things of that nature? And that will be a primary target for next year, and also to try to do better outreach through the sheriff community. Did I miss anything in that rundown? Going once, going twice. Okay. With that, we are going to move on.